what is up, people? And welcome to episode 2 of the Underground Catholic podcast entitled, What Happened to the Pope? Exactly what the fathers said would happen. Okay? So, first, a bit of a preamble. The last time I worked on these slides was June 1st, 2024, which is almost a year ago from when I'm recording this right now, which is May 13th, 2025. So almost exactly a year ago, because next month will be June, which is a year, right? So I may be a bit rusty on some of the things in here. Is like basically what I'm saying is like I haven't looked at most of these slides in a year or more. Okay, so I will not be, how do we say? Basically when you just worked on something yesterday, you're a lot more smooth with your reading of it. So basically what I'm saying is like, when I look at the slides here, I may have to kind of refamiliarize myself with the information or like what exactly I wrote on the slide and that kind of stuff. So just be prepared for that. All right. I didn't want to take just like a significant amount of time because there are over 500 slides in this presentation. And I didn't want to just spend a bunch of time reading over all 500 slides again to begin to read this or present this. Okay, so I'm just gonna go through it as we go through it. All right. Now, second of all, there are tons of other details that I wanted to add, but that would just take too much time once again. I think there are like probably close to 30 other, details and stuff I wanted to add into these slides. But that would take me such a significant amount of time. And I just feel as though I want to get started on this video, okay? Because I've been planning to make this for over a year now. And I did actually record about 7 hours, as I mentioned before. Like I think last year I recorded about 7 hours. But I decided to start from scratch because I want the recording that I release to be a contemporary version of myself, okay? Because I as a person have changed somewhat since I last recorded these slides, okay? In the sense that my frustration with being in this godless world and my agony and my torment and my spiritual suffering has reached a more extreme point than it was then. And that is an incredible statement because my suffering was already so extreme back then, as you would see from the videos I released at that time, or last year and stuff like that. My suffering and torment being in this godless world was already so horrible then, and it's even worse now, right? So I would like to present this information as a more contemporary or up-to-date version of myself. Now, I have once again not heard from TCW for many months. As those of you who follow my posts would know, I received an email from TCW, actually 2 emails from TCW around, I believe, the latter part of last year. And since then, I've not heard from them. I was hoping, and I mentioned this in the email that I sent to them as a response to the first email I got from them. I was hoping that I would be able to basically pass this presentation on to them and have them be responsible for presenting this to the world and stuff like that. But having not heard from them for such a significant amount of time, I just feel as though I should just go ahead and, start recording this and make this, and God willing, release the information. Waiting, I don't know when I'm gonna hear from them again. I could hear from them 2 years from now for all I know, so I think it's just time to get this video going. Now, regarding the information in this video, I will say that the historical information is very obscure, even more obscure than the information you'll find when researching Sedevacantism or SSPX and that kind of stuff, right? A lot of the historical details that I'm going to share with you in this presentation are very obscure or transmitted by private means rather than public means, right? And most people already consider things like Sedevacantism to be a conspiracy theory, for example. This is even more hidden than the information of that sedevacantist would typically speak about. Okay, so as you'll see in this video, and as of course many of you have already seen with the baptism of desire video and stuff like that, the truth today, whether it be regarding salvation, whether it be regarding who the true pope is, the truth today is so hidden, so suppressed, so almost entirely wiped off the face of the earth, that even most people who think they have this hidden truth don't have that hidden truth. That's how obscure it is. The truth is so obscure that most people who think they know the truth still don't know the truth. Okay? So I have exhausted researching basically everything there is out there about an exiled church, people claiming to be the true exiled pope, the remnant Catholic Church, etc. And of course, there's some degree of exaggeration here because I've not looked at every single thing everyone's ever said on the internet in the history of since 1958, of course, obviously, right? But I have gone to the depths of the internet, I guess you could say, searching and researching and all that kind of stuff. I've even seen, like, for example, I think there is like a random anti-pope in South America who claims to have been elected by like 3 people in the 1980s or something like that. I've seen that kind of stuff as well. Okay, so I've left basically no stone unturned, in a manner of speaking. So I say that to basically give you a greater degree of confidence in the thoroughness of the research that I've conducted into this matter. Okay, and of everything I've seen regarding an exiled pope, the remnant Catholic Church, all this kind of stuff, of everything I've seen from Spain to South America to Canada, all over the world, all these different groups, of everything I've seen, only one group is firmly backed by historical information, canonical information, prophetical information, and doctrinal information. Okay? That group is what I will share with you today. And I will not only give the evidence to explain thoroughly why I believe their claims about the papacy are true, but I will also prove why all of the other groups are schismatics and heretics. So basically, this presentation will not only tell you what happened to the Pope, but it will tell you why everyone else is an anti-pope or just, a schismatic or a heretic, etc. Cover both sides of the coin, so to speak, right? Because basically, as far as defending the Catholic faith is concerned, it is not only important to profess the Catholic faith, but it is also important to be able to defend the Catholic faith, right? And of course, it is totally fine for someone to believe what the church teaches and not have that sort of, I guess, academic or intellectual capability of defending it in like a debate or an argument kind of setting. That's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that if that is all God willed for you to have as a person. But when we look at people like St. Robert Bellarmine, St. Thomas Aquinas, Father Michael Muller, right? These intellectual Catholics who are extremely skilled and well learned in the ability to defend the truth against lies. That is something that's extremely important as well. Because even if God does not will you specifically as a person to have that capability or to be able to wield that information effectively, he still does call some souls to have that information, like the church fathers, for example, in order to defend the others in the church from the assaults of the devil. You understand? So not everyone is going to be St. Augustine, but St. Augustine is important because he provides the church and, other members of the church the material they need to defend the church. You understand? So yeah, I really personally, I would say I greatly admire, like almost like I can like kind of like, you know how when you play basketball and stuff, like I mean not when you play basketball, if you watch basketball, I guess you have like a favorite player and you're like, oh, I love that player. That's like your favorite player. Like you're a fan of that player. I'm like a fan of people like St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Robert Bellamy, that kind of stuff. Like to me, is just so incredible to see how God enlightens them with such incredible intellectual capability and this profound knowledge and understanding of the Catholic faith, you know? So for me, that is like, they're like my role models, you know? Like I look up to them in that regard. So Preamble 2, Part 2. What is a real Catholic? For me to consider you a real Catholic, you need two things. The first thing is strong, undying, loyal faith to the Catholic Church, okay? If you don't have strong, undying, loyal faith to the Catholic Church, I mean, you're pretty much certainly a heretic anyways, right? Because, I mean, you don't even claim to believe in the Catholic Church really, because, I mean, like in the Novus Ordo, for example, tons of people in Novus Ordo have this weak, lukewarm attitude where they think, oh, I can disagree with the church on this and believe what I want. No, you're not even, I wouldn't even entertain the idea of considering you a Catholic. You're just a lukewarm, wimpy, whatever you are, right? I don't even, you're not even a factor in my mind. The second thing is acceptance of the true exiled Pope, right? Now, I will say that I believe it is possible for someone to be a real Catholic but be sincerely ignorant of what happened to the Pope. But unless you accept the Pope, I cannot be certain you are a real Catholic, right? I can't read your heart and know whether you know God considers you to be a Catholic that's, you know, sincerely ignorant, or you haven't learned about the Pope yet or whatever, or you're literally just not even a Catholic. I can't read your soul and know that, you understand? And as St. Cyprian said, if someone does not hold fast to this unity of Peter, can he imagine that he still holds the faith? If he should desert the chair of Peter, upon whom the church was built, can he still be confident that he is in the church? Right? So if you are ignorant of the Pope, if you don't accept the true Pope, can you be certain that you're in the church? Right? That's a question to pose to yourself right there. So, while as I said, I do believe it is possible for someone to be a real Catholic and just maybe they haven't learned about the Pope yet, but still, unless you accept the Pope, I can't be certain that you're a real Catholic. You understand? So, yeah. And I want to read a few quotes here from like different saints and stuff. St. Robert Bellamy, Doctor of the Church, he says, "It is granted to few to recognize the true church amid the darkness of so many schisms and heresies, and to fewer still so to love the truth which they have seen as to fly to its embrace." And is like, if it was granted to few to find the true church in St. Robert Bellamy's time, when the church was clearly public, you know, the Pope was a public figure, all this stuff. If even with the church standing as a beacon shining in the world, it was still granted to few to realize, oh, this is the light of the world. If back then few were able, by God's grace, to see that truth, how much less now are able to see that truth? When we live in a time where the church is in the catacombs, hidden in darkness, the church is in shambles, the Pope is in hiding, all this stuff. How much less souls are saved now than then? And even back then, most people went to hell. So imagine now. There was something I wanted to mention from over here. I'm trying to remember what it was. Let me see. Hold on. I'm going to try to keep this uncut, honestly, because this video is going to be so long. There's no way I'm editing all of this. So let me see. Yeah, I don't know. Oh, I was going to mention St. Vincent Ferrer. Like during the Western Schism, St. Vincent Ferrer at one point was mistaken about who the Pope was, right? He thought that an anti-pope was the real Pope at a certain point. But I'm not aware of anyone historically that has stated that St. Vincent Ferrer was therefore, a schismatic and a heretic because it was wrong with who the Pope was at that time. So what I'm saying is, like, I believe it's possible for someone to be a real Catholic and just be ignorant of the Pope, right? My phone was ringing, sorry. I believe it's possible for someone to be a real Catholic who is mistaken about who the Pope is, but unless you accept the true Pope and have that strong, undying, loyal faith, I don't consider you a real Catholic. For example, I met someone via the internet, or I talked to them online, probably in 2023, I think, and they accepted Gregory the 18th as the Pope, but they also believed that they could privately interpret the book of the Apocalypse. So I was like, no, you are to rely on the church's interpretations for guidance if there's not a dogmatic interpretation, because many scriptures, I think most of the Bible, doesn't have a dogmatic interpretation which has been, professed in the council or something like that. Only a few scriptural passages and stuff have that kind of dogmatic interpretation explained by the church, as far as like the magisterium and that kind of stuff. But still, nonetheless, as a Catholic, you are to rely upon the church fathers, the doctors of the church, the councils, and so on as guidance for your interpretation of the Bible. You know what I mean? You can't just be like, well, because there's no dogmatic interpretation of this thing, I can just interpret it however I want to. No, because he was talking stupidness about the Democrats being the beast from the sea and all this nonsense, which is Protestant garbage. That's the kind of stupidness that Protestants teach about the Bible. I'm like, how can you call yourself a Catholic and be teaching the same stupidness that Protestants do? It just makes no sense to me. So I don't consider that person a Catholic, okay? Even though they claim to accept the true Pope. You don't adhere with the proper loyalty to the church as you should. The proper obedience, the proper respect for the church's interpretations, the church's fathers, doctors, and so on. So that's what I'm saying. For me to consider a real Catholic, you need both of these. The strong, undying, loyal faith and acceptance of the true Pope. Okay? If you have one and not the other, then I don't consider it a real Catholic, because even during Pope Pius IX's time, right, there were people who consider him the true Pope, of course, but they believe heresy, like indifferentism and all that kind of garbage. So just because you accept the true Pope doesn't mean you have a strong, undying and loyal and true faith. You understand? You need both of them together. All right, the next quote here, St. Peter Canisius, Doctor of the Church. Better that only a few Catholics should be left staunch and sincere in their religion than that they should, remaining many, desire, as it were, to be in collusion with the church's enemies and in conformity with the open foes of our faith. And of course, that is what the Novus Ordo does. They, openly fraternize with heretics and pagans and all this garbage. And the real actual Catholics who are truly Catholics are only a very small number left in the world today. St. Athanasius, Doctor of the Church. Even if Catholics faithful to tradition are reduced to a handful, they are the ones who are the true church of Jesus Christ, right? So no matter how small the church is, no matter where there's only even if there's only 5 Catholics left on earth who are actual real Catholics, everybody else is just claiming to be a Catholic, but they're a heretic, they're the real church. Okay, so some people will say stuff like, you know what I mean? Like basically making arguments about, the church can't be that small. Yeah, the church can be small. The church can be as small or as large as God wants it to be. Okay, if God wants the church to be only 1,000 people on the earth, there's only 1,000 people on the earth. If God wants the church to be billions of people, it'll be billions of people. Whatever God wants is how large or how small the church will be. All right, disclaimer. I am a layman, as I mentioned in episode 1 as well. I am not a priest, a bishop, a canonist, a trained theologian, a lawyer of theology, none of that stuff, right? I am none of that at all. I'm just a layman, okay? Just a private citizen. 2, oh yeah, so I mean, if me being a layman for you means that, I am not credible, my information cannot be trusted and that kind of stuff, if you have that kind of attitude, then this video is not for you. I mean, just, off the bat. If, however, you realize, like I do and many others do, that today the world is basically completely inundated with an overwhelmingly massive amount of heretics, pagans, demons, all that stuff, claiming to be real Catholics, claiming to be real Christians, teaching a bunch of heresy and foolishness, to such an extent that if you want to know the truth, right, 99% of the time, at least based on my personal experience and the experience I've heard from other people, if you want to find the truth today and understand the church's teaching properly, you have to undergo a pretty intense personal journey of searching, okay? Now, granted, there may be some people who God wills that they are simply basically granted the truth through some other person. Somebody may evangelize to them and God enlightens them that way. But many people today, I would think, have to undergo pretty intense and thorough personal research in order to find the truth, okay? Now, this episode will be very long. And when I say very long, episode 1 was 3 hours long, basically. Okay, episode 1 compared to this would just be like an introduction, because when I started recording this episode last year, I believe, I recorded like 7 hours and I was only at section 3, and there are actually about, I think, like 11 different sections. So this could easily be, I don't know, what's the math there? 11 divided by 3 is like 3 point something, almost 4. So let's say 7 by 4 is 28. This could easily be 28 hours long, 30 hours long. This could be a very, very long video, okay? But as I mentioned, I do plan as well to upload various sections, various clips, various subjects as individual shorter videos along with the full presentation, if YouTube will allow me to even upload a video that long. But I've seen videos on YouTube that are extremely long, so it might be able to work. It might just take a long time to load and all that kind of stuff, okay? So keep that in mind. If you plan to watch this from start to end, you probably literally would not be able to do that even if you spent an entire 24 hours just watching it, never pausing it, okay? Because I think this is probably going to be very likely over 24 hours long. I could easily see that happening. I might be overestimating it, but I could easily see that being the case. And the longer I keep saying this is going to make the video longer, right? So let me move on. So yeah, I want to keep editing to a minimum because honestly, naturally speaking, there's no way that I am sitting down to edit a 30-hour video, okay? So I want to keep editing to a minimum, right? This hopefully will be very, very uncut. So if you see me like make a mistake and have to correct myself or whatever, that's just because I try to not edit this very much, if at all. So I want this to be mostly uncut, as if I were giving like a lecture to a live audience. Okay, so there might be some imperfections, like me messing up words, having to repeat myself, etc. I might also be chewing gum or using cough drops because I have a throat issue, as I mentioned I may have mentioned in episode 1, or at least in some other videos. I have a throat issue, and chewing gum and cough drops help to alleviate that. Okay, so if you hear me like chewing gum or whatever, that is why. And I might drink some water occasionally as well, because my throat sometimes gets a little messed up from talking too much, or talking for significant amounts of time. Anyways, this video is for people who are true truth seekers, okay, and are sincerely interested in understanding the present crisis of the church and are truly concerned with avoiding the eternal darkness and torment of hell, a fate experienced by those who either die as non-Catholics or, even if they are Catholic, die in the state of mortal sin. Okay? This video is for people who are willing to see the evidence proving the true situation of the papacy. Nothing else is consistent with history, doctrine, prophecy, and canon law, as I mentioned before. If you disagree with the truth currently, I urge you to patiently and seriously watch the entire video, because an objection you think you have may be completely erased when I address it later. All right? Continuing. This video is not for those who easily dismiss, without due consideration and research, a position which they assume is absurd. For example, when I first, started considering myself a Catholic, and then I became a sedevacantist and stuff like that. And I would tell people about the Novus Ordo being satanic, the antipopes and all this kind of stuff. And there was a guy that I knew who was a Novus Ordo or a Novus Ordite. And he seemed so incredulous. Like he just lacked the ability to consider that the Novus Ordo was satanic or whatever, that kind of stuff. Is like he would ask me stuff like, are there other people who believe this like you do? And stuff. I'd be like, yeah, there are other people who believe this as well. He just seemed so, he was not very receptive to the truth, or even demonstrated a strong capacity to look seriously into the matter, And I believe in his case, as is probably the case with many other people, a problem that they encounter is basically not wanting to be accountable for their sins, right? Because I mentioned to him basically, like, if you commit mortal sin, you die in that state, you're going to go to hell for all eternity. And he started talking about, that's Phariseeism and all that kind of garbage. And I'm like, dude, I didn't say this to him, I don't think, but I'm like, just shut up. I can't talk to these people anymore. As you already know, I don't talk to these people anymore. I can't stomach to hear the garbage that comes out of their mouths. So, when you tell people about actually following God's commandments, keeping God's commandments, following the church's rules and laws and stuff like that, they'll be like, you're a Pharisee and all that kind of nonsense. Just don't talk to those fools. Just don't talk to those people. Don't talk to those people, because as you continue talking to those people, you're basically having a conversation with Satan, right? And the poison and garbage that they spew is dangerous for your soul. Okay, so I recommend avoid them. Saint Cyril of Jerusalem said avoid all heretics. Well, he said hate all heretics. So yes. Anyways, this video is primarily for people who hold to traditionalism, sedevacantism, sedepravationism, recognize and resist, or SSPX, and conclavism, right? i.e., you understand that there's a problem with modern Rome, and in some way are unsure about, or question, or reject the legitimacy of antipopes John the 23rd through Francis, and as far as I know, there's a new one, so him as well. Basically, people who, although you may not hold the correct position in this matter, you recognize that there's a problem, and that would lead me to believe that you are more strongly inclined than, say, like a Novus Ordite to consider the actual truth, okay? Now, if you are fully in the Novus Ordo, you're just a straight up Novus Ordo person that happens to see this video, the video will also be to your benefit, because the heresies of those antipopes, like John 23rd through Francis, and though I don't know anything about the new one, I have no interest in what he's going to be talking about or anything. He's just another antipope to me. But basically, if you, let me start over. If you are fully in the Novus Ordo, the video will be to your benefit, as well as the heresies of those antipopes, John 23rd through Francis, for example, and Vatican II, proving that they are not of the Catholic Church, but are products of the prophesied apostasy, will also be covered. Okay? So the video is primarily for people who consider themselves to be like traditional Catholics or remnant Catholics, that kind of stuff. But If you are a Novasordite, the video will also be to your benefit if God grants you ears to hear and eyes to see. So, there are actually 14 sections, not even 11. I want to give you kind of the table of contents of what I plan to cover in this episode, okay? The first section will be a kind of introduction talking about protecting your eyes, ears, and soul. Because I believe that this is, of course, a very important matter that when I was, say, among, quote unquote, traditional Catholics and sedevacantists and this kind of stuff, I did not observe people practicing this or employing this to as great of a degree as I think they should be, okay? And I myself, of course, have adopted more and more stringent and strict practices regarding this than I did previously. So that is not really necessarily directly related to what happened to the Pope, but I do believe it is something extremely important, and I felt strongly compelled to include it in this presentation. Of course, there should be chapters in the YouTube interface where you can go to whatever chapter you want to go to. So if you want to see, if you're just specifically interested in say sedevacantism, you could, I guess, go to that section, that kind of stuff. But I do highly recommend that you view all of the information together because it gives you just a holistic world view of the world of people consider themselves to be Catholics today, okay? Section 1 will be the heresy of Vatican II and its anti-popes, okay? So covering them and the nonsense that they teach and stuff like that. Section 2 will be an overview of the true situation of the papacy, just kind of like a summary of sorts, explaining, I think in a pretty succinct manner, what happened to the Pope, who's the real Pope right now, that kind of stuff. Section 3 will be historical and canonical proof for the true papacy. Section 4 will be prophetical proof for the true papacy. And section 5 will be doctrinal proof for the true papacy. Section 6 will cover the SSPX and, of course, their heresies or their errors or whatever, all that kind of stuff. Section 7 will cover sedevacantism and its errors and heresies and stuff. Section 8 will cover conclavist antipopes. And for those who don't know, a conclavist antipope is basically an antipope who claims that, he was elected in some secret conclave, which is, of course, not a legitimate conclave. Okay, so a bunch of people got together and they claimed to elect a pope. Okay, that is what a conclavist antipope is. Section 9 will be the Palmarian antipopes. And the Palmarians, I guess they're not technically conclavist antipopes because I think their first antipope claimed to have been divinely elected or something like that. So I guess they wouldn't really fall into the conclavist aspect. Then you have section 10, which is the quote unquote apostles of infinite love antipopes. The Palmarians are in Spain and the quote unquote apostles of infinite love are in Canada. I think they're in Quebec, Canada. Section 11 will cover how will this be resolved, right? Basically, how will this crisis end? Do we have any information to give us any idea of how this will conclude? When will it end? Will God free us from this? And when will he free us from this? Okay, because some people, I think the Diamonds, as far as a video, I think they had a video, it might have been a video years ago, where I don't know if they still hold this view, but basically they believed that our current crisis would last until the end of the world and God would return during this whole crisis of Rome that we're living in right now, which is not what prophecy states, right? So this situation will end, according to prophecy, before the end of the world. Okay, the world is not going to end with this situation happening. Okay, we're near the end of the world, but we're not at the very, very end of the world yet. Okay, because the Antichrist hasn't shown up yet. As the Bible says, the world will not end until the Antichrist appears, and the Antichrist has not appeared yet. I know the Diamonds believe that John Paul II, the antipope, was the Antichrist, which is nonsense because he doesn't fit the prophecies. Okay, the Antichrist is to be born of a Hebrew nun and a bishop, right? John Paul II was not born of a Hebrew nun and a bishop. The Antichrist will rule the world for 3.5 years. John Paul II didn't rule the world for 3.5 years. He didn't, what do you call it? Mandate the mark of the beast and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so Antipope John Paul II was not the Antichrist. He was an Antichrist, but not the Antichrist. Okay, the Antichrist will be born from among the Jews. He will be a Jewish false Christ. They will think that he is the Messiah. Okay, the Jews don't think John Paul II was the Messiah. All right, so the Antichrist has not appeared yet. The world will not end until he appears. And that's pretty clear from the Bible. So I don't know why people, but I mean, if they believe that John Paul II was the Antichrist or whatever. Okay. Anyways, let's continue. So section 12, what should you do? Basically, know that you're aware of this information. Know that you have this knowledge. God has allowed you to see this information. What steps should you take personally in your life? Okay. Then the 14th section will be the closing comments, just like, I guess, like a conclusion of sorts. Okay.